all viewers of OBN Horn of Africa. Today we are going to discuss the current situation in Ethiopia with my guest, Dr. Mama Desta. Dr. Mama Desta was born in Jamaica and she is a strong Pan-Africanist. Welcome, Dr. Mama Desta, to Future Africa program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And let's start with your name and a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, my name is actually Desta Yeshimabet Maghoo, Maghoo being my father's name. And I have a doctorate in law, Juris Doctorate. But for me, as a mother of 10, as a Pan-African, as a mother of justice and solidarity, Pan-Africanism, I like the title Mama. So Mama Desta it is for me.
And Mama Desta is your name?
That is my real name, Desta.
Well, and let me start with this question. As you are here in the capital of Ethiopia, Finfine, or Addis Ababa, the US and some Western global medias are urging foreign nationals to immediately leave the capital concerning, in connection with the peace and security situation. And
Right.
how are you here?
Well, I arrived 14 days ago. I came by plane. Landing was peaceful, airport peaceful. I've lived here for 16 years, peaceful. I've been going to grocery store, doing all my things. So it's either two answers to that question, why they're doing this. One, they don't have their geography right. They may be talking about somewhere else that is not here, which is absurd. The second is the consistent effort of colonial powers to control the narrative and assume that because they say it, it is right and everybody is going to follow along. So what we find always where Africa is concerned is others trying to shape the narrative, speak about us, and even to us and on behalf of us. But we can speak for ourselves. So it's time for us to stand up and assert ourselves and promote our own platforms for news and information and not rely on them.
And as you know, the Western global powers are usually interfering in the African internal affairs. And why do you think they prefer to do so?
This is historical. The gold, the uranium, the diamonds, the rubies, the oil, all the resources, the cocoa, everything, sugar, right, that has enriched these colonial powers that call themselves the first world have been done so on the backs of Africa, particularly, where most of these resources, natural resources, have come from. So it continues to be in their interest, economically, politically, and otherwise, to assert themselves over us. But this was changed in 1963 when the OAU was established, right here. Capital again, peaceful Addis Ababa, Finfine as you mentioned. This place here is the center, the capital, the diplomatic capital of African unity, solidarity, all African nations. So we have to do everything that we can to make sure that we end their narrative and just keep focused on what we're doing.
And what can you say about neocolonialism that most African countries are suffering from?
Again, this is what we as activists coming out of the African diaspora call white privilege. White privilege basically says, because I am who I am, I have the right and the privilege to do so. And you just have to go along with it. Because you depend on me. You cannot do without me. When it's quite the opposite, isn't it? So neocolonialism in any form, be it racial, political, cultural, spiritual, it is a time now when, through especially this No More campaign, it is ending. People are becoming awake. You know, we just had Black Lives Matter movement in the United States asserting the same thing. Black Lives Matter. No More is asserting that to neocolonialism. No more. It's going to be a difficult path for us to do what we have to do, but we're capable. We have all the resources because number one, we have the human resource. We have the individual African who wants more, who aspires to more. Education, economic opportunities, even migration within 55 nation states. So we know how to fix our problems and we cannot give up. We cannot give up and we cannot give in.
And many Africans are calling for the rebirth of Pan-Africanism. And do you think it will be realized?
Absolutely. And the word rebirth is interesting because as a Pan-Africanist, it would indicate that there was a death for us to now talk about a rebirth. I think it is in transformation in the 21st century because what Pan-Africanism looked like in the late 1800s, and you had people like W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey and others who came out of that era who looked to Ethiopia because they had been victorious over a colonial power. So it wasn't just a military exercise or battle, it was an affirmation as to African strength and unity and solidarity. And so as we look at where we are today, over 100 years later, it's the same thing that we're saying. We just have to, as His Majesty said when the OAU was opened, he asked his brothers from the other nation states, now that we've finished the job, what shall we do with the tools? Africa still has tools that we have used to build pyramids, to build Aksum, to build Timbuktu. Now we have to retool them for the 21st century, relying and empowering our youth with these tools to ensure sovereignty and indeed this notion of Pan-Africanism, the wide respect and understanding and application of Pan-Africanism in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. Because one thing, Pan-Africanism is not just this ideology and, oh, we love Africa. It's about independence. It's about self-determination. It's about collective responsibility. It's about our economic. This is why we now have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, right? The largest trading bloc in the world. And so all these elements, culture, spirituality, tradition, are all part of the Pan-African notion. And we have to be able to teach this, most of all, to our children. We have to start from early, letting them know that they are the inheritors of this great, great, great Pan-African way of life that will protect them and nurture them and build them to be the next generation that will protect and carry us on.
Ethiopian Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed in the front line to lead the fight against the terrorist TPLF.
Yes.
And what is your opinion on this?
When I look at, first of all, I must disclose, he and I share the same birthday, August 15th. So I've always felt a connection. That's personal. But what our Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, is doing is, one, taking care of his responsibility as our leader and the duty that he has had as Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Forces. He is implementing just what he said he would do when he was elected by tens of millions of this country. That's his job, to protect this nation. And from a cultural or historic standpoint, he is doing what his predecessors have done. So he has it in his DNA. He has this sense of protection and providing for this country in his DNA. And what he's doing is appropriate. You see, the Western media, again, they don't understand what this means because they're looking at everything from their perspective, where someone sits in an office and directs others to do. He does that as well. But he is discharging his duty as the Prime Minister of this country to protect and set an example, motivate, and again, this is the constitutional responsibility that he has. Mm-hmm. So we as mothers, grandmothers, sisters, we pray for him and all the troops because every life is valuable.
And some arguments are coming out that all African countries are not equally fighting against neocolonialism. And do you share this claim?
Absolutely. But the important question is why? Why is it that most African countries are grappling with how to manage or reconcile neocolonialism? Part of it is that most African countries have just been released from colonial powers. Look at South Africa. As big as that country is, it's just a couple of decades since Nelson Mandela was freed from prison and the country has been independent and a part of the continent, recognized, not as a rogue state, an apartheid state anymore. So you have time. You also have the economics. Most francophone, all francophone banks, their money is tied to the central bank of France. You know, so until we are in a position to particularly economically control our destiny, much like what Ethiopia is doing, and that's why everything right now is so important, with the building of GERD, with the dam, that will help our self-sufficiency, not just bringing electricity to Ethiopians. That's very good. It means now not just that children can study and get a better education, but that women and youth can establish businesses, that we can have access to this electricity that will help to develop the country individually and collectively. So other African nations will be and are inspired. They always watch Ethiopia. So I do believe that Ethiopia, looking at things from a wider lens, indeed that Pan-African lens, while concentrating firmly, because we have to put our energy right now into redeveloping all the destruction that has come from the terrorist group and from external forces as well as internal forces. So we can indeed be an example to other African nations that may be afraid or concerned about cutting away what it will mean to their citizens. We can be that example of, yes, we can cut away, and we can stand on our own. Let them cut their goal, let them cut whatever they want. We have the ability. 110 plus million people in this country, we have the ability, we have the resources, and we have the drive. We have the drive.
Let me add this question again. How should Africans fight against the Western global powers pressure? Political pressure is there, economic pressure is there, and so on and so forth.
Everything else. They even will have the nerve to tell us that we are primitive and not civilized because we hold on to our traditional practices. You know, even within the Oromo culture, there are traditional practices that our ancestors practice. Same thing within all of the groups. There are traditional practices that are the core and the essence of who we are. And so that is actually going to be one of the answers to how we can defeat colonialism. We need to go back to our traditions and take pride in them. Because I think for too long we have been told, unless we're like you, wearing a tie and a suit and looking so-called civilized and looking like them and speaking like them in proper English and proper French or whatever, that we're not civilized. We have to claim who we are. Our identity, we have to claim that and not let others tell us who we are, how we should speak, that our time is wrong because we say 4 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock, or, So it is really paramount for Africans to hold on to their culture and their tradition with their life while advancing through technology, education, science, math, and the arts and culture to forge a new way for this next generation to come in this 21st century. And we're capable of doing it. We've always done it. Before Europe had a civilization, as I said before, we were building Aksum and pyramids in Giza, and we had Timbuktu and centers of learning. This is who we are, naturally. Socrates and all these, Aristotle, these Greeks, they used to come to study, right, on the banks of our River Nile. So it's time for us to educate ourselves to who we are, gain back our identity and not be ashamed of who we are. And also look at ourselves both locally but globally, because what this experience that we have had as we have fight for our life and for our sovereignty of Ethiopia has showed us is that Ethiopians and Africans and black people throughout the world are watching and standing with us. And so if we can share this message of what it means to be this strong Ethiopian, to be this strong African, it is going to obviously impact and influence, just as the victory of Adwa did, how we think and how we shape ourselves. And that's the only way to fight neo-colonial narratives. Finally, our media is very important. It's really important that we establish, we promote, and we encourage our own stories on our
That's
own
part
platform.
of my question. You have to say it in depth.
Yes, you see, because we have our news agencies, we have our bloggers, we have our Zoom meetings, we have all kinds of information sources through government or private sector throughout the continent. And if we're able to put focus into that, matter of fact, I used to be on Facebook, I ended. About a month ago, I said, I'm not doing Facebook anymore because you know what? It's still them. It's their narrative and they want to use this as they want. So for me, Bakadon, I'm going to wait for the African version to come on and I will join that. So we have to begin to again empower and strengthen what we have amongst us so our stories are the ones that get told. And it's not to say we're sugarcoating anything. It's not that everything is perfect and fine, but it's important to have balanced stories that allow all of our voices to be heard because we're not going to agree on everything. You know, I'm married. My husband and I don't agree on everything. I've got children. We don't agree on everything. But it's the ability to come together and discuss. And these are some of the things, just to go back to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, that he's making available for us. Right? The ability to contest, to discuss what our concerns are. So this is how we will build our own level of stories, narratives, and platforms that we can express ourselves and not depend on others. So if these external foreigners, foreign media houses tell their stories, it won't even matter. It really won't even matter anymore because we will know what our story is and we will block them out to the point that they won't even be able to infiltrate us anymore. So there's a lot of work to be done. And one of the things that we have to take out of the tragedy and the pain and the loss of life and livelihood that this country has had to bear, we have had to bear over the last year. We have a lot of rebuilding to do. We have a lot of healing to do. And the media is going to be important because the messages that we share and that children hear and that elders hear is going to be important to the whole reconciliation process, to rebuild not just Ethiopia, but the African continent and how they relate to colonial powers and media perspectives on us.
And I think the leaders and youth should play a strong role. And if you can say something on this.
Absolutely. Especially, you know, where the leaders are concerned, political leaders, and you also have business leaders, because it's unfair to put everything on the government's shoulders. Private sector, civil society, students, everyone has to be a part of our progress, you know, and where leadership is concerned, it has to be now thinking out of the box. The things that we thought could work 50 years ago, 10 years ago, 3 years ago, no longer work. So now we have to go in and be strategic. We have to be critical and understand what are some of the things that can work. What are some of the things that we need? Because this is another thing about neocolonialism. They want to tell us what we need. They want to tell us what is best for us here in Africa. No, we can't accept that anymore. We know what is best for us as a nation as well as a continent. And our leadership has to be influenced heavily by what the people want and what the people need. And look at things in a long-term level, not just 5 years, but 50 years down the line, just as Agenda 2063 that the African Union has. It's an agenda that all nation states, 55 African states agreed on. 2063, what will Africa look like? So we have to set these long-term goals through our leadership to establish that. But in terms of implementation, we need private sector. It's not just enough for us to say, oh, Ethiopia, we have so many millionaires. What you doing with the money? Is it just enriching yourself and your family? No. Where Ethiopia is right now, and I thank God actually, because we have seen a response. All Ethiopians from all sectors of life, rich, poor, have been giving, have been contributing. We want that to continue. We want that to continue for our rebuilding. We want those in the African diaspora to continue to have fundraisers, identify projects here in Ethiopia that need to be addressed, and make that your project. Together, we can rebuild, and we can rebuild quickly. But we must understand and come together with the converging theory that this is about what is best for the lives and livelihoods and redevelopment, and as you mentioned, rebirth of this astonishing, incredible land called Ethiopia. We call it the land of miracles. You know? So it's just bright, and Addis Ababa is fine. I just have to say it again.
Let me finalize with this question. And Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has a big vision, you know, to realize the rebirth of Pan-Africanism. And my question is, what should Africans do to succeed this African agenda?
Yes, you know, that's an interesting question. And again, one of the mistakes that we make many times is we put everything on the shoulders of one person. And it is our responsibility and our duty to answer the Prime Minister's call, because he will not be able to do it by himself. He can put mandates, he can put laws, he can do whatever, but if we're not willing to contribute to this rebirth, rebuilding of the notion of Pan-Africanism, the love for Africa, the commitment to the development of Africa, it's going to be a very strong uphill battle. And him coming off of the military fields, he should come back to a nation that is ready to help in this aspect of Pan-Africanism, rebuilding through culture, through the arts, through education, the various ministries taking on the ethos. Every ministry should take on that philosophy of Pan-Africanism because it's part of Ethiopian. It's part of Ethiopianism. It is what has driven us. The core of Ethiopia is what has driven. Pan-Africanism is the baby of Ethiopia. So we have to nurture this child, Ethiopia more than ever. We have to nurture this child that we call Pan-Africanism. That is realistically, when you talk about 100 years plus, it's not a long time. So call it a teenager, if you will. This notion of Pan-Africanism, call it a teenager that is in need of all, just as His Majesty summoned here to Addis Ababa all the African leaders who were free at the time, over 34 of them. This is what the Prime Minister is doing. Likewise, is summoning our African heads of states. And it is my hope that he'll be able to impact even practices and policies of the African Union who are still not in step yet. Because the AU has to catch up. The AU has to catch up with the notion of Pan-Africanism and the Africa that we want. And it is my hope that PM Abiy, for our upcoming summit, because I expect there will be peace and victory by that time for the next summit, which is in about another 8 weeks, that he will be able to endear this message to the African heads of states to join him lockstep in this challenge to ensure Pan-Africanism is not just a word, not just an ideology, but a practice, a practical way of developing this continent and ensuring that we are protected and the sovereignty of every 55 state is also respected worldwide.
And finally, if you have any message to my audience, you're welcome.
You know, love is the answer. Love is really the answer. Love of country, love of family, even love of yourself, because if you love yourself, you are going to take responsibility for what you have to do as a human being to help this country heal after all it has gone through. We're very thankful with the success of the hashtag No More campaign. I remember I joined it when there was maybe 5,000 people on it, you know, and now it's millions, right? It's all over. So as individuals, that's the first thing. Take responsibility. Ask yourself, what can I do for Ethiopia? What can I do to even make myself a better person and therefore make my nation a better person? The second thing is, let us plan for after the victory. What can you commit to? What should you commit to? Is it fundraising in your community? Is it identifying 1 or 2 children that you can send to school to ensure that within 20 years we have a strong generation of leaders? You know? So let us begin to plan for the future. And thirdly, I come back to the concept of love. We have to find a way to forgive but never forget. We have to ensure justice, because without justice there is no peace. So let us be measured in everything that we're doing. Let us try to make sure that our emotions are balanced with logic and process and procedure and law and order, so we can ensure a balanced society, a society where everybody is valued, a society where every individual, whether you're 99 or a newborn, you know that your rights are protected and preserved, and you can live in a peaceful nation. This is what we want. And if we have the notion of love in our hearts, we shall succeed.
Well, Dr. Mama Desta, thank you very much for your time and for your analysis as well.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here, and keep up your work.
And dear viewers, I'm sure you have got some important pointers from this discussion. And this brings us to the end of this edition. Till next edition, goodbye.